The cold wind howled through the empty streets as the mysterious truck rumbled down the dark road. Its headlights sliced through the thick fog, illuminating the path ahead. The engine hummed steadily, but something felt off. From the shadows, 5 dogs emerged, eyes locked on the moving vehicle. Their bodies were tense, muscles coiled, ready to chase. Then, as if they had all received the same unspoken command, they sprang into action. The leader of the pack, a golden retriever named Max, took the front, his powerful legs pounding against the pavement. Behind him, Bella, a fierce German shepherd, kept pace with Duke, a massive Rottweiler. 2 smaller but equally determined dogs, a beagle named Rusty and a scrappy mutt called Shadow, followed closely. Their paws hit the ground in perfect rhythm, their breath visible in the cold night air. The truck sped up. So did they. Something about this vehicle had set them off, something their instincts told them was not right. The streetlights flickered. As the chase intensified, the truck driver, an older man with tired eyes, glanced in his side mirror. His brow furrowed. Why were these dogs chasing him? He pressed the gas, trying to shake them off, but they didn't stop. They ran harder, pushing themselves beyond their limits. Max barked, a sharp, urgent sound that sent a shiver down the driver's spine. There was no aggression in it, only desperation, a warning, but the driver ignored it. Then, suddenly, the truck jerked violently as one of the back tires hit a deep pothole. The vehicle swerved. The driver cursed, gripping the wheel tightly, struggling to regain control. The dogs kept running, their eyes burning with determination. Then it happened. With a loud hiss, the truck's brakes screeched and it skidded to a stop at the side of the road. The dogs surrounded it instantly, barking wildly. Their tails rigid, ears pricked forward. Their behavior wasn't random. They weren't attacking. They were trying to tell him something. The driver's hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. His heart pounded in his chest. He had driven this route 100 times before, but never had he been chased like this. Never had animals reacted to his truck this way. What was inside that had them so desperate? Slowly, cautiously, he stepped out. The air was thick with tension, the night impossibly silent, except for the heavy breathing of the exhausted dogs. Then he heard it. A sound. From the back of the truck. A faint whimper. The driver's blood ran cold. His hands shook as he walked towards the cargo area. The dogs fell silent, watching his every move. Max let out a low whine, his tail wagging slightly, urging him forward. The driver took a deep breath and unlatched the truck's doors. What he saw inside made his heart stop, and in that moment he understood why the dogs had chased him all this way. The truth was far worse than he could have imagined. The cold wind howled through the empty streets as the mysterious truck rumbled down the dark road. Its headlights sliced through the thick fog, illuminating the path ahead. The engine hummed steadily, but something felt off. From the shadows, 5 dogs emerged, eyes locked on the moving vehicle. Their bodies were tense, muscles coiled, ready to chase. Then, as if they had all received the same unspoken command, they sprang into action. The leader of the pack, a golden retriever named Max, took the front, his powerful legs pounding against the pavement. Behind him, Bella, a fierce German shepherd, kept pace with Duke, a massive Rottweiler. 2 smaller but equally determined dogs, a beagle named Rusty and a scrappy mutt called Shadow, followed closely. Their paws hit the ground in perfect rhythm, their breath visible in the cold night air. The truck sped up, so did they. Something about this vehicle had set them off, something their instincts told them was not right. The streetlights flickered as the chase intensified. The truck driver, an older man with tired eyes, glanced in his side mirror. His brow furrowed. Why were these dogs chasing him? He pressed the gas, trying to shake them off, but they didn't stop. They ran harder, pushing themselves beyond their limits. Max barked, a sharp, urgent sound that sent a shiver down the driver's spine. There was no aggression in it, only desperation. A warning, but the driver ignored it. Then suddenly, the truck jerked violently as one of the back tires hit a deep pothole. The vehicle swerved. The driver cursed, gripping the wheel tightly, struggling to regain control. The dogs kept running, their eyes burning with determination. Then it happened. With a loud hiss, the truck's brakes screeched, and it skidded to a stop at the side of the road. The dogs surrounded it instantly, barking wildly. Their tails rigid, ears pricked forward. Their behavior wasn't random. They weren't attacking. They were trying to tell him something. The driver's hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. His heart pounded in his chest. He had driven this route 100 times before, but never had he been chased like this. Never had animals reacted to his truck this way. What was inside that had them so desperate? Slowly, cautiously, he stepped out. The air was thick with tension, the night impossibly silent except for the heavy breathing of the exhausted dogs. Then he heard it, a sound. From the back of the truck, a faint whimper. The driver's blood ran cold. His hands shook as he walked towards the cargo area. The dogs fell silent, watching his every move. Max let out a low whine, his tail wagging slightly, urging him forward. The driver took a deep breath and unlatched the truck's doors. What he saw inside made his heart stop, and in that moment, he understood why the dogs had chased him all this way. The truth was far worse than he could have imagined. The driver's breath hitched as his eyes adjusted to the dimly lit cargo space. Crates and boxes were stacked carelessly, but among them, huddled in the corner, were several frightened puppies, thin, trembling, and barely making a sound. Their wide, terrified eyes locked onto the man, their bodies pressed against the cold. Metal walls. Max and the others barked again, this time softer, almost pleading. The driver swallowed hard, guilt creeping into his chest. He had no idea that these poor creatures were in the back of his truck. But then, who put them there? And why? Before he could step closer, a low growl from Duke made him freeze. The Rottweilers. Gaze had shifted beyond the truck, toward the dark road behind them. The others followed, their ears perked up, hackles raised. They weren't just focused on the puppies, they sensed something else. A car, a pair of headlights pierced through the fog, moving fast, too fast. It wasn't a random passerby, it was following the same route, heading straight for them. The driver's gut clenched. Someone was coming, and judging by the dog's reaction, it wasn't anyone friendly. He turned back toward the truck and quickly climbed inside, kneeling near the puppies. Their frail bodies flinched, but when Max hopped in beside him, they seemed to relax slightly. He reached out a hesitant hand and gently touched one of them. It whimpered, but didn't pull away. Then a thought struck him. He recognized this truck. It wasn't his. He was just a driver following orders, but he had never questioned what he was transporting before. Now it was clear. He had unknowingly become part of something terrible. The barking grew louder. The oncoming vehicle was getting closer. The driver's mind raced. If someone had gone to the trouble of smuggling these puppies, they wouldn't be happy to find them exposed. And if they were dangerous enough to need secrecy, what would they do to him for discovering the truth? His heart pounded as he considered his options. He could try to flee, but where? These dogs had chased him down, led him here for a reason. They trusted him to do the right thing. A choice had to be made. And fast, before he could think any further, the car skidded to a stop a few feet away. The driver's door opened. Heavy footsteps crunched against the gravel. A deep voice rang out, "Step away from the truck, now!" Max growled low, standing protectively, in front of the driver. The other dogs followed suit, their teeth bared, ready to defend. The man outside took another step forward, his shadow looming large against the headlights. The driver felt a surge of courage. He might have been caught up in something far bigger than he realized, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt these dogs. Not on his watch. The man outside took another step forward, his shadow stretching across the road. The driver's breath caught in his throat. Max and the other dogs stood their ground, growling, their eyes locked onto the approaching figure. The tension in the air was thick, charged with something the driver couldn't quite explain. Fear, determination, and an unsettling sense that he was about to uncover something much bigger than he had ever imagined. "Step away from the truck," the man repeated, his voice firm, laced with quiet menace. The driver clenched his fists. He had spent years behind the wheel, moving cargo from place to place without ever questioning what he was transporting. But tonight was different. The terrified puppies, the relentless pursuit by the 5 dogs, and now this man. All of it pointed to something sinister. Instead of complying, he took a step back, putting himself between the puppies and the stranger. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "What's in this truck?" The man scoffed, his lips curling into a smirk. "That's none of your concern. Just walk away and we won't have a problem." Max let out a deep, warning bark, his body tense. The other dogs followed suit, fanning, out protectively around the driver. The man's smirk faltered for a brief second. He wasn't expecting resistance. The driver swallowed hard. He had a choice. Hand over the truck, pretend he hadn't seen anything and walk away, or stand his ground and risk whatever was about to come next. But as he glanced at the puppies, still trembling in the back of the truck, he knew the decision had already been made. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Tell me what's really going on." The man's face darkened. He reached into his coat, and for a brief moment, the driver thought he was going for a weapon. The dogs must have thought the same thing because, in an instant, Duke lunged. The massive Rottweiler knocked the man off balance, sending him staggering back. "Call them off!" the man shouted, his hands raised defensively. The driver didn't move. Max, Bella, and the others stood firm, their growls rumbling low in their throats. The man's eyes darted between them, assessing his options. He wasn't alone. The car behind him had 2 more figures inside, their silhouettes barely visible through the windshield. Then, just as the driver braced himself for what would happen, next a sound cut through the night. Sirens, red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. The man cursed under his breath. He shot one last glare at the driver before turning on his heel and sprinting back, toward the car. The doors flew open, and within moments the vehicle peeled away, tires screeching against the asphalt. The driver exhaled sharply, his heart still pounding. He turned back to the puppies, who were still huddled together, watching him with wide, trusting eyes. The police car skidded to a stop beside him. An officer stepped out, flashlight in hand. "You all right?" he asked, scanning the scene. The driver nodded. "I think so." The officer's gaze landed on the open truck, the puppies inside. His expression hardened. "We've been tracking a puppy smuggling operation for months. Looks like you just found their latest shipment." The driver's stomach twisted. He looked at the puppies again, realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. These weren't just random dogs. They had been stolen, ripped from their mothers, packed into crates and shipped off to be sold illegally. Max and the others had known. Somehow, they had sensed it. The officer turned back to him. "Did you know what you were carrying?" The driver shook his head. "No, I swear I had no idea." The officer studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, we'll need your statement. But first, let's get these little ones somewhere safe." As other officers arrived, carefully lifting the frightened puppies from the truck, the driver felt an overwhelming wave of relief. He looked down at Max, Bella, Duke, Rusty, and Shadow. They had chased him down, risked everything to stop the truck, and now he understood why. He crouched down, running a hand through Max's thick fur. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured. "You saved them." Max licked his hand, his tail wagging ever so slightly. For the first time that night, the driver smiled. The truth had stunned him. But more than that, it had changed him. And thanks to these 5 incredible dogs, justice had been served. The night was still thick with tension, but as the last police car pulled away, the weight on the driver's chest slowly lifted. The puppies, once shivering with fear, were now being cared for by officers who promised to take them to a shelter. Their tiny whimpers had turned into soft, trusting sighs as they nestled against the warm hands of their rescuers. The driver sat on the edge of his truck, running a hand through his hair. His heart was still racing, but a deep sense of relief settled over him. He had spent years behind the wheel, moving cargo without question. But tonight had changed everything. Max and the other dogs stood close, their eyes fixed on him. They had chased him for miles, risking everything to stop the truck. And now the truth was out. These weren't just 5 random dogs. They were heroes. A soft nudge against his arm made him look down. Max, the leader of the pack, rested his head against the driver's knee, his dark brown eyes filled with something unspoken. Gratitude, trust, maybe even understanding. "You knew, didn't you?" the driver whispered, scratching behind Max's ears. "You knew what was in that truck before I did." Max's tail gave a slow wag, as if confirming it. The officer who had questioned him earlier approached, his expression softer now. "Looks like you had some unexpected partners tonight," he said, nodding toward the 5 dogs. "We've been after this smuggling ring for months, but we never expected a pack of dogs to lead us straight to them." The driver shook his head, in disbelief. "Neither did I." The officer crouched down, stroking Bella's fur. "These dogs belong to someone. They're trained, coordinated. It's like they were on a mission." The driver frowned. A mission? It made sense. These weren't just strays. Each one carried a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose. They hadn't chased the truck out of instinct. They had known exactly what they were doing. But why? Before he could ask, another officer called out. "We," and checked their tags. Turns out they belonged to an old rescue shelter on the outskirts of town. The owner, an old man named Henry, reported them missing last week. The driver's stomach clenched. Missing? These dogs hadn't just run away. They had escaped. He looked at Max again, realization dawning. "You ran away to stop this." The officer nodded. "Looks like it. We'll need to take them back to the shelter and let Henry know they're safe." A strange feeling settled in the driver's chest. He had spent most of his life alone, never staying in one place long enough to make connections. But tonight, something had changed. These dogs had risked everything to do the right thing, and in the process, they had saved him too. As the officers prepared to transport the dogs back to their shelter, the driver felt a sudden sense of urgency. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. "Wait," he said. "Can I come with you?" The officer raised a brow. "You want to go to the shelter?" The driver nodded. "Yeah, I think I need to." The shelter was quiet when they arrived. The building was small, worn down by time, but it had a warmth to it. A porch light flickered above the entrance, casting a soft glow over the front steps. An old man with silver hair stepped outside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. "Max, Bella!" His voice cracked with emotion. "Duke, Rusty, Shadow!" The 5 dogs bolted toward him, their tails wagging wildly. He dropped to his knees, embracing them all at once, his weathered hands shaking as he stroked their fur. "I thought I lost you," he murmured. "Where have you been?" The driver watched, something tightening in his throat. These dogs weren't just heroes, they were family. Henry finally looked up, his eyes meeting the driver's. "You're the one who found them?" The driver hesitated, then shook his head. "No, they found me." Henry's gaze softened. "Sounds about right." He stood, giving Max a final pat before turning to the driver. "Come inside. You look like you could use some coffee." The shelter was modest but welcoming. Faded photographs lined the walls, each one capturing moments of rescued dogs with their new families. The scent of old wood and fresh hay filled the air. As Henry poured coffee into 2 mugs, the driver finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why did they run away?" Henry sighed, settling into a chair. "They didn't run away," he said. "They went after something." He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze distant. "A week ago, we found out about the puppy smuggling ring. We tried to stop them, but we had no proof, and then one night these 5 just left. I didn't understand why." The driver's hands tightened around his mug. "They knew." Henry nodded. "They knew." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Henry looked at the driver, studying him. "You're not just passing through, are you?" The driver hesitated. He had spent years on the road, never staying in one place for long. But tonight, something was different. He felt different. "I don't know," he admitted. Henry smiled. "Well, if you're looking for a place to stay, I could use an extra set of hands around here. The dogs seem to trust you." The driver looked down at Max, who had settled beside his chair, his head resting against his knee. Trust. For the first time in a long time, the driver felt like he belonged somewhere. Maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. The sun rose over the shelter, casting golden light over the fields. The driver stood outside, watching as Max, Bella, Duke, Rusty, and Shadow ran through the grass, their tails wagging, their mission complete. He had spent years moving from place to place, never questioning what he left behind. But now, as he stood among these dogs, he realized something. Some journeys don't end where you expect them to. Some lead you home.